Liquid gold of Rome, the day an emperor taxed urine and built an empire. Rome, 69 AD. The treasury is empty. 4 emperors have fought each other for power in a single year. The city is in financial collapse. And one man has just taken the throne with the most unlikely plan in the history of economic policy. He is going to tax urine. Not symbolically, not as a joke. He is going to build a formal government bureaucracy around the collection, sale and taxation of human urine, and use that revenue to fund one of the greatest construction projects the ancient world has ever seen. His name is Vespasian, and according to documented Roman historical records, the phrase he coined to defend this decision is still quoted in economics classrooms 2,000 years later. The year 69 AD is known to historians as the year of the 4 emperors. In the 12 months following the death of Nero, Rome burned through Galba, Otho and Vitellius in rapid succession. 3 men who held the most powerful position on earth and lost it through assassination or military defeat within months of gaining it. By the time Titus Flavius Vespasianus emerged from the civil war as the last man standing, the Roman treasury was in a condition that modern economists would describe as catastrophic. Nero's reign had been expensive in specific and well-documented ways. According to Suetonius, writing in his Lives of the 12 Caesars, Nero spent extraordinary sums on personal entertainment, palace construction, and the rebuilding of Rome after the Great Fire of 64 AD. The civil wars that followed his death added military costs on top of structural deficit. Vespasian, who had spent his career as a military commander rather than a court politician, looked at the empire's finances with the unsentimental eyes of a man who had managed military logistics and understood exactly what it cost to keep a large organization functional. He needed money, a great deal of it, and he needed it from sources that the previous administration had either ignored or considered beneath the dignity of imperial attention. According to the historical record preserved by Suetonius and confirmed by later Roman administrative documentation, Vespasian was entirely willing to pursue revenue streams that more aristocratically minded emperors would have found distasteful. He had a phrase for this philosophy, though he had not yet coined it in its famous form. The idea was simple. Money is money. Where it comes from is a separate question from what it is worth. To understand why urine was a taxable commodity in ancient Rome, you have to understand what urine actually was in the Roman economy, and the answer is not what modern instincts suggest. Human urine, particularly aged urine that has been allowed to ferment for several days, undergoes a chemical transformation. The urea it contains breaks down into ammonia, a compound with powerful alkaline properties that make it extraordinarily effective as a cleaning agent. The Roman textile industry, which produced and cleaned enormous quantities of wool fabric, linen, and the toga cloth that was the uniform of Roman civic life, had known this for centuries. According to Pliny the Elder, who documented practical Roman industrial knowledge in his encyclopedic work Naturalis Historia, the use of aged urine in textile processing was established practice long before Vespasian turned it into a tax base. The collection system was practical and visible. According to archaeological and historical evidence, large ceramic vessels, amphorae, were placed at regular intervals along Roman streets, particularly near the public baths and latrines, specifically for public urination. Passers-by used them. The vessels were collected, transported, typically at night by cart, and sold to the fullones, the professional textile cleaners whose workshops were distributed across Roman cities. This was not a shadow economy or an informal arrangement. It was a recognized commercial system with established pricing and regular transactions. The people who collected and transported the material had an understood role in the urban economy. The buyers, the fuller workshops, depended on the supply as a core production input. What did not exist before Vespasian was any mechanism by which the Roman state collected revenue from these transactions. That was the gap he identified. And according to the historical record, he moved to close it with considerable efficiency. The Fullonica, the Roman fuller's workshop, was one of the most important industrial facilities in the urban economy, and one of the least discussed in popular accounts of Roman civilization. The archaeological evidence from Pompeii, where the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD preserved an entire working city in volcanic ash, has given historians an extraordinarily detailed picture of how these workshops operated. The Fullonica of Stephanus at Pompeii is the most completely preserved example. Excavated and studied extensively since the 19th century, it reveals a facility organized around a series of large, waist-deep stone vats arranged in rows. Into these vats went fabric, wool togas, linen garments, newly woven cloth requiring its first cleaning and processing, along with water and the ammonia-rich liquid that the collection system supplied. Then the workers got in. According to the mosaic artwork found at Pompeii depicting the fuller's trade, and confirmed by literary descriptions in Roman sources, the cleaning process involved workers standing in the vats and treading the fabric underfoot with their feet and legs, rhythmically, for extended periods. This was the physical mechanism by which the ammonia penetrated the fibres, broke down the natural lanolin oils in wool, removed staining compounds, and produced the clean, slightly stiffened, bright finish that Roman clothing consumers expected. The physical demands were considerable. Standing in a vat of diluted ammonia solution for hours at a time, performing repetitive physical motion in an enclosed workshop environment, this was not comfortable work. The smell of a working Fullonica, according to references in Roman satirical literature, was something that permeated the surrounding streets and was well known to anyone who lived or worked nearby. Roman writers, including Martial, used proximity to a fuller's workshop as shorthand for a particularly undesirable living situation. And yet, the fullones were commercially successful, organized into professional guilds, and politically active in their communities. The Roman use of urine extended well beyond the textile industry. According to Pliny the Elder's Naturalis Historia, the most comprehensive surviving encyclopedia of Roman practical knowledge, urine appeared as a useful substance across a remarkable range of applications, each of which makes chemical sense when examined through the lens of modern chemistry. In the leather industry, the tanning process requires breaking down the protein structure of animal hides to make them soft and workable. Urine's ammonia content, along with other compounds produced during fermentation, accomplished aspects of this process that Roman tanners had learnt through generations of practical experience. The resulting leather was softer and more consistently processed than leather treated without these compounds. According to historical records, the Roman leather industry, which supplied boots for the legions, harnesses for cavalry, and leather goods for everyday civilian use across the empire, relied on this process as standard practice. Roman dental hygiene, documented by Catullus and other writers with a degree of sardonic commentary, included the use of aged urine as a tooth-whitening agent. The ammonia content does in fact have a bleaching effect on tooth enamel. Modern chemistry confirms the mechanism, even as modern dentistry emphatically recommends against the application. The Romans who practiced this were not mistaken about the outcome. They were simply not in a position to weigh it against alternatives that did not yet exist. In medicine, Pliny documents multiple applications of urine in wound treatment and skin conditions. Some of these reflect genuine antimicrobial properties of fresh urine in specific contexts. Others reflect the Roman tendency to extend a substance's known utility into areas where it provided limited or no actual benefit. The line between effective folk medicine and ineffective folk medicine is one that ancient practitioners could observe only through outcomes, without the theoretical framework to understand why some treatments worked and others did not. The financial situation Vespasian inherited in 69 AD was, by the calculations preserved in Roman historical sources, severe. Suetonius records that Vespasian himself estimated the deficit he needed to address at 40 billion sesterces, a figure that historians have debated for centuries in terms of its precise modern equivalent, but which all agree represented a genuinely existential challenge to the functioning of the imperial government. The normal Roman approaches to revenue, taxation of provinces, tribute from client kingdoms, sale of public land, military plunder, were either already maximized or unavailable given the military and political disruptions of the preceding years. Vespasian was therefore in the position of an administrator who needed to find revenue in places that previous governments had overlooked, either from oversight or from an unwillingness to associate imperial dignity with certain categories of economic activity. According to Suetonius, Vespasian's approach to this problem was systematic and unsentimental. He reviewed the entire Roman economy for undertaxed or untaxed commercial activity, and moved to bring it into the revenue system. The urine trade, commercially significant, organisationally established, and entirely untaxed, was an obvious candidate. The tax he created, known as the urinarium, applied to the commercial collection and sale of urine from public facilities. It targeted the fullones and the collectors who supplied them, not individual citizens making personal use of public facilities. The revenue it generated was real, sufficient, according to historical accounts, to contribute meaningfully to the rebuilding of Roman public finances under Vespasian's reign. And the political controversy it generated was also real, most prominently from a source that Vespasian found, by historical accounts, more amusing than troubling. The conversation between Vespasian and his son Titus, is one of the most famous exchanges in Roman historical literature. It is documented by Suetonius in his Life of Vespasian, written approximately 30 years after the events it describes, drawing on earlier sources and oral tradition. The specific details may carry some literary shaping across that distance, but the core of the exchange and the phrase it produced is confirmed across multiple ancient sources. Titus, who was Vespasian's son and designated successor, objected to the urine tax on the grounds that it was undignified, not economically unsound, not administratively impractical, undignified. The association of imperial revenue collection with a substance that Roman social convention classified as waste and embarrassment was, in Titus's view, damaging to the image of the imperial office. This was a serious argument by Roman standards. Imperial dignity, the gravitas and auctoritas of the emperor, was not merely ceremonial. It was a functional political asset that affected the emperor's ability to command loyalty, enforce decisions, and maintain the cooperative structures through which Rome governed a vast and diverse empire. Vespasian's response was physical before it was verbal. According to Suetonius, he picked up a coin from the first revenue collected under the new tax, a gold coin representing real money generated by the new levy, and held it under his son's nose. Then he asked whether the coin smelled. Titus, presumably, confirmed that it did not. And Vespasian delivered the line, "Atqui ex lotio est," yet it comes from urine, followed by the principle that has outlasted both of them by 2,000 years. Pecunia non olet. Money does not smell. The phrase entered Roman political culture immediately and has never left. It appears in legal texts, in philosophical discussion, in economic argument across the centuries that followed. It is used today in exactly the same contexts Vespasian intended, as a defense of pragmatic revenue generation against objections rooted in aesthetic or moral preference rather than practical consequence. The administrative machinery that Vespasian built around the urine tax reflects the broader sophistication of Roman fiscal governance. According to historical and legal records from the imperial period, Roman tax collection operated through a system called tax farming, the auctioning of collection rights to private contractors called publicani, who paid the government an agreed sum up front and then collected the actual tax from the relevant commercial actors, keeping the difference as profit. This system had well-documented advantages and well-documented problems. The advantages were administrative. The government received guaranteed revenue without needing to maintain its own collection bureaucracy in every corner of the empire. The problems were also well documented. Tax farmers had strong incentives to collect more than the agreed rate, leading to the kind of abusive over-collection that appears repeatedly in Roman legal complaints, and was sufficiently common that imperial legislation repeatedly attempted to constrain it. For the urine trade specifically, the tax farming system meant that the right to collect the urinarium in a given city or district was auctioned to a contractor, who then had legal authority to collect from the fulones and urine traders operating in that area. According to Roman legal texts preserved in the Corpus Juris Civilis, the great legal compilation of Emperor Justinian, The details of these collection arrangements were formalized in contract law with considerable precision. The revenue generated by the urinarium contributed to Vespasian's broader fiscal recovery program. And that program produced one of the most enduring monuments in human history. According to historical records, Vespasian began construction of the Flavian Amphitheatre, the building the world knows today as the Colosseum, in approximately 70 AD, using spoils from the sack of Jerusalem and revenue from his reformed tax system. The urine tax and the Colosseum are, by the historical record, connected. The most visited ancient monument on Earth was funded in part by the commercial cleaning industry of Rome. The workers of the Follonica occupied a specific and somewhat contradictory position in Roman social structure. The work was physically demanding, chemically unpleasant, and socially stigmatized in the way that all manual labor associated with waste products tends to be stigmatized across cultures. And yet, according to the archaeological and epigraphic evidence from Pompeii and other Roman sites, the Follones, as a professional class, were neither poor nor politically marginal. The guild records and electoral graffiti preserved at Pompeii, the political endorsement inscriptions that covered public walls before Roman municipal elections, show the Follones as an organized professional body that endorsed candidates and expected their endorsement to carry political weight. They had collective identity, commercial organization, and sufficient resources to participate meaningfully in civic life. The master of a successful Follonica was a small business owner with employees, property, and social standing within the working-class districts of Roman cities. The health implications of the work, however, were significant, in ways that Roman medicine could observe but not fully explain. Extended exposure to ammonia vapours, which were present at high concentrations in any working Follonica, causes respiratory irritation, eye damage, and skin conditions with chronic exposure. According to historical analysis of Roman occupational health patterns, fuller workers showed higher rates of certain respiratory conditions than the general population. They did not have the conceptual framework of occupational medicine to understand why. They experienced the consequences regardless. The use of Fuller's earth, a naturally occurring clay mineral with absorbent properties, alongside the urine-based cleaning process, added a second stage of treatment that improved the final quality of cleaned fabric. This combination of chemical and mineral processing was, by the standards of pre-industrial textile production, genuinely sophisticated. Roman cloth production achieved quality levels that were not consistently matched again in Western Europe for many centuries. Vespasian's urine tax left traces in European languages that survive to the present day, traces that most people encounter without having any idea of their origin. In France, public urinals were historically called Vespasiennes, named directly for the emperor who formalized public urine collection as a taxable commercial activity. In Italy, public toilets in some regions are still called Vespasiani. These are not historical curiosities preserved by scholars. They are words that remained in active popular use for centuries because the connection between Vespasian and public sanitation infrastructure was genuinely embedded in European urban culture. The phrase pecunia non olet has had an even longer and more consequential afterlife. It appears in medieval legal texts as a principle governing the acceptability of revenue from morally questionable sources. It is cited in early modern banking and commercial law as a foundational principle of economic pragmatism. In contemporary discussion of tax policy, the phrase is invoked whenever arguments arise about whether governments should accept revenue from industries considered socially undesirable, whether that is alcohol, gambling, tobacco, or carbon-emitting industries. The modern concept of a carbon tax, levying charges on activities that produce environmental harm, creating financial incentives for behavioral change while generating government revenue, follows exactly the logical structure that Vespasian applied to urine in 69 AD. You identify a commodity or activity that has commercial value, that imposes costs on the public system, and that currently generates no public revenue. You create a tax. You collect the money. And if anyone objects on grounds of dignity or aesthetics, you hold up the resulting coin and ask whether it smells. Vespasian's reputation in Roman historical memory is that of one of the most competent and practically effective emperors in the history of the empire. He stabilized finances, initiated major construction, and governed without the dynastic violence that characterized many of his predecessors and successors. The Roman urine economy is not simply a strange footnote in ancient history. It is a detailed, well-documented case study in how a sophisticated civilization managed resources that other frameworks classified as waste, and in how political leadership can find economic solutions in places that convention refuses to look. The Roman recycling economy, and that is genuinely what it was in functional terms, operated on a principle that the modern circular economy movement has been trying to re-establish for decades. Nothing that has commercial value should be allowed to remain classified as waste. The urine that flowed through Roman streets was not garbage. It was a chemical input to multiple industries. The infrastructure to collect, transport, and distribute it was worth building and worth governing. And the revenue that could be derived from taxing those transactions was worth collecting, regardless of what the material smelled like. According to the historical record, the Roman sanitation and textile systems that depended on this economy collapsed along with the rest of Rome's administrative infrastructure in the 5th century AD. The knowledge did not disappear entirely. It survived in craft traditions and in the texts that monastic libraries preserved, but the organizational scale required to make it economically significant was not rebuilt in Western Europe for many centuries. Modern waste management, modern recycling systems, and modern industrial chemistry have independently rediscovered many of the principles that Roman Fulones practiced empirically. Ammonia is still a major industrial chemical. The alkaline cleaning of protein-based fibers is still a standard textile processing step. The economic principle of finding value in what others discard is still one of the most reliable sources of commercial innovation available. 2,000 years after Vespasian held a gold coin under his son's nose and asked whether it smelled, the answer remains the same. It does not. And the question of where value comes from, what makes something worth taxing, worth collecting, worth building infrastructure around, is still one of the most important questions in any functioning economy. Rome answered it with a thoroughness that deserves more recognition than it typically receives. The empire that built the Colosseum was funded in part by the people who cleaned its citizens' clothes. That is not a footnote. That is how civilizations actually work.